thanks.
I can't read otherwise. Can't breathe. I already have anxiety as it is. Okay, so we have many definitions already in this first line. The paradigms of comedy are manifold, outwardly disparate, and even refractory in their refusal to yield to generalities. Let's do some defining. Okay, paradigms means patterns. Just write that down. Your pencil, patterns. Manifold means various or many. Disparate means different. Refractory means mirror-like. And generalities means labeled in general. All right, so if I was to put this in English, the patterns of comedy are various, they're different, and they're mirror-like in the fact that they refuse to be labeled. What I mean by that, or what Dr. Cowan means by that, is that from poop jokes to almost seeing the light of God is comedy. Yes?
I'm sorry, can you say disparate and generalities?
Disparate means different, and generalities means labeled in general.
Okay, thank you.
This book right here. So all of the Divine Comedy by Dante, this book right here, this is where Dr. Cowan gets her 3 kinds of comedy. So you have Dante's Inferno. You may have heard of Dante's Inferno. It's pretty famous. But that's what we call dark comedy. Then in the middle you have Dante's Purgatorio, which is where all of us live. It's like this the general world. I had to read all of this for a graduate class and it was absolutely gorgeous. I would have never read it if I hadn't been forced. But at the end you have paradise. And at the end of paradise, you see the light of God. And it says, the pilgrim Dante says, but then my mind was struck by light that flashed. And with this light received what it had asked. I'm not reading this, I'm just reading Dante. So Dante the pilgrim is, he's so ready to see God. He thinks he's going to see God, right? But he's like, it's not going to happen. But then my mind was struck by light that flashed, and with this light received what it had asked. Here, force failed my high fantasy, but my mind, my desire, and my will were moved already, like a wheel revolving uniformly by the love of God that moves the sun and the other stars. Just gorgeous. And so comedy is poop jokes to that, what I just read. So that's what comedy is. Everything that happens in the world. You have really base things like going to the bathroom. Think about Paul Baumer and all his people, comrades, and how they have to like makeshift toilet and they all laugh about it, right? Then you have Dante, who is so close to seeing the light of God, or you have other people who've had near-death experiences, right? So that's how Dr. Cowan is introducing this, that they're various, they're different, and they refuse to be labeled. Next sentence. Far more than other genres highlights, comedy invites a skeptical attitude toward any effort to isolate out of its multiplicity a single principle of classification. Stop. Yet a serious attempt at comic theory can hardly escape the conviction that, highlight, works customarily designated as comic, despite their variety, do indeed participate in some sort of community. Stop. If the tie joining them is something like the goal to airy thinness beat of John Donne's superliterary lovers, indiscernible to those whose soul is sense, it is nonetheless binding. Such dissimilar specimens as Minnie turning Odysseus' long voyage home, Aristophanes' fantastic obscenities, and the worldly intrigues of new comedy are open examination found to be capable of coming together in an unlikely harmony, I like unlikely harmony, and the churchly art, that's it though, with the churchly art of mystery plays, the spiritual writings of Dante, I just read that to you, Shakespeare's benevolent deceptions for love. Highlight this. Something links together in one category works that are outrageously different, requiring anyone thinking about comedy to confront on all sides the most perplexing contradictions. Stop. You know what a contradiction is?
I know you can like contradict yourself if
Yeah.
you say one thing.
Yeah, you say one thing and you do another. Right. So, and apparently these troublesome antinomies, circle that word, and then the definition of antinomy is a paradox. And I'm about to give you a bigger definition. Are you guys with me online? How you doing? Someone speak up. I can't see you. Maya, how you doing? Okay, good. I can't see you. I can hear you, but I can't see you because I'm way over in front of the room. All right. Okay, we're on first page, bottom of page 1. The word antinomy. It means paradox, which is a contradiction between two beliefs that are themselves reasonable. So a paradox is a contradiction between two beliefs which are themselves reasonable. So this would be when you have to choose between two good things. Or even if you have, like you've heard of the term, choosing between the lesser of two evils. Same thing. So you have two good things or you have two bad things, but you got to make a choice between the two. That's called an antinomy. Apparently these troublesome antinomies contained within the phenomenon of the comic are I can say that. I can't ever say this word. Irascible, there we go. Which means you can't separate them. Like, you can't separate them. Or you could write cannot be separated. So these paradoxes, these contradictions can't be separated. You're supposed to choose, but yet they're bound. So you're choosing, but the other one kind of comes along for the ride. By any process of simple reduction. The notion, highlight this. The notion of comedy seems by its very nature to include all aspects of human life, the darkest as well as the brightest elements of the entire literary spectrum. In fact, upon observation, comedy shows itself to be the least exclusive of all literary forms. We're still highlighting. Oh, I forgot you guys have to actually turn the page. Top of 2. The least exclusive of all literary forms, able to accommodate structures at once simple and complex, treating both the natural and the artificial, and reconciling the grossest bodily indecencies with the most rarefied spiritual and intellectual refinements. Stop. Yet despite a puzzling breadth and variety, any single comic specimen is likely to manifest a discernible characteristic that proclaims its identity. Critics and audiences alike have almost without fail been able to recognize a work of comic art. And not necessarily because by its possible incitement to laughter. Sorry, I'm reading my own annotations to see if I want to say something. Comedies have been designated comedies even when their atmosphere is melancholy and depressing, as in the plays of Chekhov, or even painful and disgusting, such as those of Ben Jonson and Samuel Beckett. Thus, one might hazard that an encompassing image lies beyond mere appearances in comedy, capable of being recognized in countless situations with varying characters on different strata of life. Strata means like spectrums, like different lines, so you could say class differences, racial differences, gender differences. So even, no matter who you are, what she's trying to say, that you can recognize a comedy. We can recognize something as comedy even when it's gross, even when it's disgusting, even when people die. We can still recognize it as a comedy. With emphasis on many possible segments of a large central action. Such an image could be said to be expressive of a fundamental aspect of human feeling and, as such, to elicit a response less acquired than innate, less reasoned than instinctive. Highlight. In fact, the comic sense seems to suggest to its audience a hidden current in the flow of life, intelligible to all members of the human race, at its most basic level what Susan Longer has called the pure sense of life, and at its highest the river of living water spoken in of the scriptures. Basically, if you want to write in the margins, comedy is, we just naturally recognize it. Even babies know when something's funny, right? Now, they don't have the mental ability or the acuity to recognize something as being like sarcastic. In fact, I've read that you can't really recognize sarcasm until you're about 13. So whenever I'm sarcastic with my own kids, they're 7 and 5, I have to remember that they think I'm serious. Like, they're sort of picking up my own comedy, but it's been difficult. The oldest one is definitely more in tune still, and he can kind of joke with me now. But even babies can know when something's funny, can recognize comedy. It's because it's a hidden current. It's the basic sense of life. Well before apprehending plot, character, or theme, spectators or readers are able to observe clues pointing the direction in which their imaginations are impelled, which means pushed.
You said that means push.
Pushed, yeah. They can almost unconsciously gauge from angle and speed the implied destination, the completed curve, one might say, of which only an arc is visible. Audiences and readers and readers are hence not likely to mistake comedy. They are able with little difficulty to distinguish it from tragedy or epic. Stop. Further, comedy might be said to belong to a people as community even more than the other genres. No culture has lacked some manifestation of it, and it is often so woven into the patterns of a social order that it is taken for granted and comes to be disregarded as serious art by intellectual members of society. And yet comedy might be thought of as an expression of the more communal unconsciousness of a people, its yearning for a more liberated life, keep highlighting, and as such a binding force among its members. Stop. Alright, so I'm going to draw a little picture behind me on the board. Those of you who are online, I'm going to draw a picture right now of the arc. I'm going to draw the arc in a circle. So, here's an arc. Here's an arc too, right? So, if I show you this, it can be really one of two things. It can be a what or a what. It can be a circle or an oval. Do you have to see the whole thing to know that it could be a circle or an oval? Could it be a rectangle? Could it be a square? Could it be a parallelogram? No. Okay, we only have to see part of it to know that it's going to be a circle or some sort of circular circle or a half circle or something, right? Same thing with comedy. I can tell one joke and you would know if I was funny or not. I'm sure you've walked into a room where the teacher is like super cool, funny, me, and then, first day. And you're like, okay, yeah, she's funny, but you didn't have to sit here the whole day to hear me say something funny. There's also people that are really trying too hard, right? And you're like, okay, you didn't have to hear them, repeat their whole spiel and they're not funny. They're just trying too hard, or they're just dry, or they're just not funny. They haven't embraced their comic spirit. So Dr. Cowan's going to give a really cool metaphor or analogy here about pudding, which on the next page he's going to talk about pudding, which is super funny. But back to the top of page 3. You with me online, people? Just checking in. Yes? Thank you. But if as viewers people apprehend comedy without much conscious effort, as critics, when they come to analyze the comic effect, they tend to mistake accidental properties of individual comedies, for instance, satire, farce, wit, and humor, for the comedic image itself. But comedy, as a handful of authorities have pointed out throughout the ages, highlight, is not necessarily the laughable. Stop. W.K. Wimsatt's remark that a comedy that does not provoke laughter seems to be an odd success is applicable only if one can discern no other more compelling purpose for comedy. Highlight. Perhaps Plato began the oversimplification when in the Phlebas, keep highlighting, he assumed comedy to be about the ridiculous and ascribed the audience's mixed feelings on viewing a comedy to a combination of pleasure and envy. That is, we are delighted by the misfortune of our friends. Keep highlighting. Aristotle continued this misconception when he viewed comedy as an imitation of characters of the lower type, particularly the ludicrous, which consists in some defect or ugliness, which is not painful or destructive. Stop. Medieval theorists, largely following the lead of Aristotle and Horace in an analysis of the formal parts of comedy and its ethical nature, gave their chief concern highlight to the comic catharsis. keep highlighting, which they deem to be laughter, and to the comic moral responsibility of teaching. Stop. All right, this is big. So you should put some stars next to this part. Okay, so if the tragic catharsis is an emptying out of like your pity and your fear, the comic catharsis is laughter. You're laughing so you can. I mean, how many times in the pandemic have you just laughed about it and gone like, WTF? Okay, can 2020 be any crazier? 2020, 1 out of 5, do not recommend, right? It's like you just, but you have to, people say you have to laugh about it. That's what they mean. Because if you don't laugh about it and you take it too seriously, it'll really get you. Like it can really drive you into the ground. I think we're all doing that right now. So we have to purge those emotions that are built up within us by laughing. In fact, there's a famous Oscar Wilde. I have a sticker on my door that says, "Life is too important to be taken seriously." I mean, you have to take it serious. You have to know when to be serious and when to just laugh it off and be like, 2020, pandemic, masks, and whatever, go away. It's just that's what I mean. So, and comedy has a responsibility to teach. So true comedy, like true comics, think of Dave Chappelle. Like his whole job is to be funny and to teach you something about his situation, right? Any comic is like that. Female comics are always joking about like the female body and like being pregnant or having the P word or whatever. It's like you have to joke about some of these things because if you can't like make fun of yourself and your situation, then no one's ever going to learn about it because people learn the most when they're the most open, and they're the most open when they're happy. Like, it's very hard to learn from a person who is not happy, who's angry, and angry doesn't want to be there. Right? I'm sure you've had teachers like that. Where they don't want to be there, which makes you not want to be there. It's like, dude, this is your job. Like, if you don't want to do this, then why do I want to do this? So, again, comedy's responsibility is to teach. Does it teach you as much if it's a poop joke? No. But it's still funny. You still get something out of it. You still can laugh about it. I mean, if you're 7 and you're a boy, like my son, is just like the word poop is the funniest thing you've ever heard in your life. Are you going to laugh about maybe seeing the light of God? No, you're going to be just like taken aback. Like, wow, that was big. And you're learning something along the way. Okay. The immense body of Italian Renaissance literary criticism had no trouble reconciling the still dominant medieval didacticism with the new humanism, blah, blah, blah. Keep going. Led to the highlight where I'm at. Highlight this widespread conviction. This is the bottom 4 lines of that middle paragraph on 3. Widespread conviction by the 18th century that comedy teaches the sensible attitude toward life, which we call raison, by ridiculing the rigid, extreme, fanatical, and pretentious. Stop. In other words, we make fun of you if you're extra. Okay? If you're extra, you're going to get made fun of. If you're pretentious, like if you judge other people, you're going to get made fun of. If you're a fanatic, you're going to get made fun of. If you're too crazy about anything, you're going to get made fun of because you just are. It's like, that's just life. If you're too extreme about something, it's just going to, just back off, okay? Like, I love this stuff, but if I get too crazy about it, I'm like, you guys need to learn this, because this is the rest of your life. You're like, golly, ladies, settle down, right? I'm serious about it, but I also know that, like, you're 15. You're not as serious about it as me. If I'm a fanatic, then you're going to think that I'm crazy, and you're not going to want to learn from me. That interpretation has prevailed with some exceptions to the present time. A few critics and philosophers in our time, Susan Longer, Albert Crook, Northrop Frye, Neville Colville, among others, have given their attention to highlight what is behind comedy, the invisible metaphor, which I have been speaking of as the image. Stop. But in the main, the bulk of comic theory today, as in the past, has tended to develop around the idea of highlight social amelioration. Okay, and way to make society better. A way to make society better. Do you have a pencil? So in your definitions, I wrote it as ameliorate, because that's the root of amelioration. Ameliorate just means to make something feel better. So, like my daughter, she thinks that if she's got like a teensy weensy little boo-boo, she needs like 7 Band-Aids, right? Because the Band-Aid will ameliorate her pain, either psychologically or physically. And when you were little, did you want a Band-Aid for every little thing that happened to you?
Yes.
Yeah, because it somehow, it makes it better because your mommy put it on for you, or your daddy put it on for you, right?
I just thought it made me look cool.
You just what?
I just thought it made me look like a bad.
My parents didn't help me.
They're mean.
They didn't help me put on Band-Aids. They gave me peroxide.
Oh, my kids, they just know, they take stools and put them on top of stools, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna be going to the hospital for a month. And I'll be here in just a second.
Yeah, I just put on Band-Aids for fun because I thought they looked cool.
Yeah, that's why I don't buy the ones with cute characters, because I know I use them for fun.
Yeah.
I just get the plain ones. Okay, largely deriving from the Greek and Roman New Comedy, and though over the years criticism has clarified formal elements and distinguished between such strains as wit and humor, burlesque and satire, farce and comedy of manners, it has chiefly remained, top of floor, concerned with the constitutive elements rather than the entire phenomenon of comedy. Its governing outlook, one might say, that which makes a single imaginative mode and animates its specific parts. Further, comic theory as it now stands seems to have made little effort to apprehend the way in which a particular instance of comedy, even when it represents only a portion of the complete comic action, evokes and fits into a full imaginative world of comedic possibilities. So what she's saying is you can't isolate comedy. You can't, just because something's funny doesn't mean that it's like pure, well, I guess it is comedy because it's happening in the city by definition. I guess it doesn't mean it's good comedy. You can't isolate it. The task of highlight this. The task of understanding the nature of comedy then is to be pursued less by analysis than by vision. Stop. Now, can anybody digest that for me and tell me what they think that means? To be pursued less by analysis than by vision.
Maybe to like not really think about it.
That's right. Yeah, to not really think about it, right? You don't have to like say, hey, we're gonna go to a really funny person. I mean, this is why they're funny, and you like tell them all the reasons they're funny. They don't have to have that. They don't have to like lay out the facts about this comedian. You either go see him and you think he's funny or he's not, right? It just is what it is with comedy.
Like when people explain like a joke.
Yeah, if you have to explain your joke, it didn't hit, right? It's just like, it didn't work.
Yeah, because if you have to look into it, then it's just not funny anymore.
Right,
And
yeah.
like,
Yeah, if you have to think about it, you're like, comedy should like basically blow through all of the walls you put up and hit you right in the middle. Consequently, comic theory poses a problem that can hardly be solved by empirical methods, like scientific methods. By juxtaposing or even superimposing artworks generally designated comedies, in attempting to ascertain their common structural or thematic constants, however, much such a strategy may constitute a beginning. It is by necessity an ontological question, circle the word ontological, that the literary critic poses in seeking to know the essential nature of comedy. And though a satisfactory apparatus for resolving ontological questions may not readily be at hand in our time, nonetheless, the serious critic of comedy must at least make the attempt to engage the issue. Okay, ontological, you know this from the epic, it means to know a thing all at once. So, write that down. Ontological means to know something all at once. So you know somebody's funny, one joke, you know they're funny. It's like falling in love. People say that love at first sight is not real. It actually is. Because, it is. I guess, I think it takes, I think you have to have a comparison, but like, I know that this sounds gonna be so cheesy, but you're girls, sorry, boys online. But the first day I saw my husband, I was like, we're gonna get married. Like the first day. I'd had enough boyfriends to know that this was the one I wanted to marry. I didn't have to talk to him. I like saw him across the room. Oh, I saw him across the bar. Excuse me. Let me be clear. Oh, I forgot this is online. And I said to my friend who, like, I said, you know that guy over there? And she's like, yeah. Like, I go to college with him. You may introduce you? I'm like, yeah. So we did. Got introduced and, like, hung out the rest of the night. And, like, that was it. Like, that was it. And he knew, too. And that was that. So I think there is such a thing because you just have to see this part of it to know that this whole circle will be complete. And I'm not a cheesy person. I'm not.
That was really cute though.
Okay, I gotta tell you a story as an aside. So, I tell lots of stories. Sorry, people on the camera. So, when I was a freshman in college, my husband would have been a senior, my husband now, like, but not we weren't married then, right? He would have been a senior in high school at a different school, so I didn't know him like at all. I was actually dating a guy my freshman year in college, and we were walking in the mall together. And they had this photography studio used to post all of the senior portraits up in the mall. This is 94, y'all, so people really still like stuff like that. Going to malls and having big senior portraits. So, and there was this picture of a guy, and he was like doing the typical senior portrait where you're just like laying on your side. But he had just his shoulder pads on. And I was like, because of the lighting and just the shoulder pads, and I was really drawn to the picture. And, you know this is going, don't you? And I was with my boyfriend, and I had to like cross over him to go to this picture. And I'm like, come on, let's go look at these pictures. They look cool. And I went right to that picture. And he's like, you just think that guy is hot. I'm like, yeah, he is hot. And whatever, right? Just walked away. And then me and that guy broke up. He thought I wouldn't be a good minister's wife. And he was right. So he broke up with me, and he didn't become a minister. He became somebody who worked on the oil fields. And then he got divorced, I think. But anyway, whatever about him. So much for him, as Hamlet would say. Or was it? No, it was Gert. It was quoting King Claudius, the guy who killed his brother. Never mind. But anyway, back to the story. So then I fast forward 4 years, maybe 5, 4.5. And I meet my boyfriend, you know, I told you that story just a second ago, my husband. And the first time I met his parents, I go to his house, and I walk into his bedroom, and guess what picture is hanging in the bedroom? That picture that was at the mall. This is not even anything close to an exaggeration. I'm like, I told him, my husband, I said, you're not going to believe this story, but it's just like, it's out of a book for real.
Wow.
It was great.
That's
Crazy. It was just, and that's comedy, like that's just life, it's just that force, that's just like, what is, sometimes, not always, but sometimes what is meant to be will like find its way, you just have to kind of put yourself in the right place, right? Okay, back to the story. You guys still with me or did you fall asleep online? You're about to cry? Oh, that's so sweet. Look at this, what are you talking? Who's I? Why are you? And who is this? I can't. Oh, why are you having a crisis? It sure is philosophical. That's my class. Welcome to Philosophy 101. And it's supposed to look like English, but really it's philosophy. Yes, you can. Okay. Alright, so we got ontological definition. Next paragraph on page 4, starting with admittedly. Highlight this. Admittedly, one can know the nature of comedy only through the immediate thing, the individual work. Stop. But the fictional whole, the player of the novel, presents to the imagination an intuition of an invisible form, which from a glimpse may be apprehended in its entirety. Highlight. It is here that the underlying form of comedy is to be found, not so much as in an abstraction, as in an image that the mind seizes upon with delight. The task, stop highlighting. The task of the critic, however, is not to stay with this super-actual realm, but rather to return to the work at hand, better equipped to explore its nature. In such a process, highlight, a specific representation of human action is able to reveal the universal image of comedy that has rendered countless dramatic works of art comic, and, as such, recognizable to their audiences throughout the years. Okay, the next paragraph is super funny and not like Dr. Cowan at all, because she doesn't usually go down this far into like analogy. But she says, and you should highlight this because it's perfect, one does not have to eat the entire pudding to know that it's flavored with vanilla, or that it is pudding and not a cheese souffle. All you need is a taste. Stop. True. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you close your eyes and it's kind of like The Voice, right? Where you're like, you don't see the person who's singing, you just have to hear a couple notes to know that they're a good singer, right? And I don't have to, and very rarely are you confused if it's a male or a female singing, right? So it's kind of like that. You don't have to hear the whole song. You don't have to eat the whole pudding. It's vanilla pudding. It's not a cheese souffle. It's not even chocolate pudding. It's vanilla pudding. I love that analogy. Similarly, the character of comedy is so definitive, its reality is so unquestionable, that one can discern its nature even from a brief experience of the work. Its qualities permeate it as the vanilla permeates the pudding and thereby modifies its component parts. For it is not the separate, I like this, it is not the separate features of an art product that make it comedy. Rather, it is its purpose, the form-making principle of the entire work that welds all its elements into a single unit. Stop. One should be able, I maintain, to choose any page of a work, not necessarily the beginning or the end, but any portion of it, and discern from a reading of this segment whether or not the work is comic. Start. Start highlighting. Even though tragic elements may be present in comedy, or comic elements in tragedy, the reader or the hearer can still detect the general nature of the work as a whole. Stop. In other words, you can have a really dark comedy and a lot of people will die. But if the comic hero doesn't die, it's still a comedy. So we are, despite the fact that 250,000 Americans have died, we are still in a comedy. Why? Because you didn't die. Your life is still a comedy. The only thing you have to know about comedy is, did you die? That's it.
Yes.
You didn't die. You're still physically alive. Your soul may be dead.
You're not wrong.
No, y'all are too young for dead souls.
It's getting
I still have time. But and same thing with tragedy. In tragedy, as we're going to find out here with this Hamlet example, that Hamlet is a very, very funny person. He is comic, but he's tragic in the fact that he's a prince. And he makes these errors that pull the whole world down with him. So let's read this. In Hamlet, for example, the wordplay, punning, levity, wit, Hamlet's antic disposition, which means fake madness, his wild and disconcerted action are devices that one associates with comedy rather than tragedy. And in a point of fact, the young prince does behave for a while like a comic protagonist, as in his baiting of Polonius. I should show you this clip. It is so funny. Okay, so Polonius is his girlfriend's dad. His girlfriend's name is Ophelia. And you're going to show you the clip?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. It won't take me long to find it. Sorry, you guys, I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but I'll show you what I'm going to use in a second. Oh, you're going to see me again, people online. Hello again. Hello. 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 It's off to work we go. What page are we on? 5, someone said. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you for being here. Alright, so I am going to find a clip for you guys about Polonius and Hamlet. Get on my internet. Okay. Go to a place called YouTube. Okay, so a little exposition set up here. So this is Hamlet, and he's basically in the castle just reading, and Polonius has been sent by the king, who is Hamlet's uncle, who Hamlet suspects of killing his dad. And Polonius has been sent by the king Claudius, the uncle, to figure out what's wrong with Hamlet. And so Polonius is going to come in and say, he's just going to try and have a conversation with him. It's pretty funny. So let's let me share the screen and share my sound. Okay, here we go. Tell me if you can hear it, please. Maya, can you hear it? Thank you.
Well, God have mercy.
Keep in mind that Hamlet is a tragic hero, so.
You know me, my lord.
Oh, yes, my lord.
You are a fishman.
I wish you were so honest a man. I said to be honest as this world goes is to be one man picked up at 10,000.
That's very true, my lord.
For if the sun breed maggots in a dead dog, being a god, kissing carrion.
Have you a daughter? Let someone walk in the sun.
He says, have you a daughter? He's dating her! So he's being dumb. And he's telling her right now to not let her walk in the sun because she might get pregnant. That's what's being said, the underlying words.
Conception is a blessing.
Conception is a
As your
blessing.
daughter may conceive. And
He's saying, I'm gonna get your daughter pregnant.
to it.
And he's like, what?
I don't say about that. Still harping on my daughter. But he knew me not at first. He said I was a fishmonger. He's far gone, far gone. I'm sure in my youth I suffered much extremity for love. Wilderness. I'll speak to him again.
Do you read my
What do you read, my lord?
Words. Words.
words?
Words. What is the matter, my lord?
Between whom?
I mean the matter you read, my lord.
Starless, sir, for the satirical rogue says here that old men have grey beards, that their faces are wrinkled, their eyes purging thick amber and plum tree gum, and that they have a plentiful lack of wit, together with most weak hands, all which that I most powerfully and potently believe in. I hold it not honesty to have it thus set down, for you yourself, sir, shall grow old as I am, if, like a crab, you could go backward.
This to madness, yet there is method. We walk out of the air, my lord.
It's my grave.
Indeed, that is out of the air. Tightness sometimes replies well. A happiness that often madness hits on, which reason and sanity could not so prosperously be delivered of. I will leave him as suddenly contrived the means of meeting between them. Titus replies well. Methodist. We walk out of the air, my lord.
It's my grave.
Okay, so when he says, so that's all funny, right? And then it's all funny, and he's knocking Polonius, like he's like to his face, telling him he's an old man with weak hands and no wit and blah blah blah. But Polonius is still pursuing it, and when he says, "Will you walk out of the air?" and Hamlet says, "Into my grave," we're back to a tragedy, because the tragedies pull us towards death. A comedies pull us towards life. And that would have never been written if this was a comedy. Yes, Hamlet is funny, but he's still a tragic hero because he literally is walking towards his grave. So, how do you know the difference between a tragedy and a comedy right off the bat? You can feel it. You can feel when you are moving towards reconciliation in a marriage. Why a marriage? Because marriages make babies. Right? Or you can feel when you're moving down, like towards death. And she even says it. So she gives all of this when she says, "Excellent, my lord, you are a fishmonger." I'm in the middle of 5, by the way. "Not so, my lord." Hamlet says, "Then I would you were so honest a man." And later in the same conversation, he purposely misunderstands Polonius' inquiry. "What is the matter, my lord?" Hamlet says, "Between who?" "I mean the matter you read, my lord." Hamlet says, "Signed it, sir, we just read that. If like a crab, you should go backward." The undertone to this essentially comic routine is is not only a dark irony, but a deathward pull, so that you're not surprised when Hamlet replies to Polonius the solicitor's question, top of 6, will you walk out of the ear, my lord? And Hamlet says, into my grave. The entire passage, so highlight into my grave, because then you know that's a tragedy. Okay? On the top of 6, do you have highlighters too? We're talking about how you figure out the difference between a tragedy and comedy. Comedy moves towards life, tragedy moves towards death. And although Hamlet's funny, he's still a tragic figure. The entire passage with the foolish old courtier, Polonius, has all the earmarks of comedy, a comic repartee, as does the coarse jesting with his girlfriend Ophelia, the sparring with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the ironic exchange with the gravedigger. Yet it is clearly recognizable that in Hamlet, one is not in a comic but a tragic realm, no matter how foolishly people may conduct themselves in it. In counterposition are the mini-comedies, All's Well That Ends Well, Much Ado About Nothing, The Merchant of Venice, and later plays The Winter's Tale and Cymbeline. So these are all Shakespearean comedies. All of these comedies contain dark, painful, and unpleasant elements, the raw materials of tragedy, one could say, and most of them have less to do with laughter than with shock and grief. Go to the very bottom of this page 6. 4 lines up. If we were to place Hamlet, see it? If we were to place Hamlet, a tragedy, beside Tempest, a comedy, for instance, seeking to ascertain their respective genres by a comparison of elements, we would find striking similarities. Both plays are about usurpation, betrayal, assassination, revenge, the perils of a father-daughter relationship, the grief of a son of a father, death by water, rebirth by sea. Yet one play is definitely a tragedy and one is a comedy. Highlight this. Comedies are perceptibly governed by the comic image, not simply by virtue of their happy endings or by the discursive, which means round and around structure, but by their very being, the way in which characters and plot develop, the manner in which people speak, the course that events take, the apparent incidentals that incorporate themselves into the action. Over and above these single words appear universal features, complex structures or qualities, and values that are discernible in life only through having been given the form in the realm of comedy. Keep going. As Dante says, or at least as Barbara Reynolds has him say, my sight by seeing learns to see. Those things that are all about us are noticeable only by being fitted into a different kind of totality, in this case, the comic universe. Stop. That makes sense, right? You can only learn to see stuff if you learn to see. By basketball learning to play basketball. My reading learns to read. My playing an instrument, by playing the instrument, learns how to play the instrument. It's just a circular reasoning. It makes sense. Like, you can't become a better reader or a better athlete or a better player of an instrument if you don't play the instrument. It's just all there is to it. Same thing with seeing. Like, you gotta know what you're looking for. The only way to know what you're looking for is to practice seeing. The reason that I knew that my husband was my destiny is because I had seen other boys that weren't. I was practicing my seeing. Then I finally found the one, and I'm like, that's the one, because I had practiced my seeing. Which is why I think it's crazy when high school people get married, because you haven't seen enough. You haven't practiced your sight enough. It's good practice, but you know what I'm saying. I won't go any further. Such reflections on comedy give rise to fundamental questions concerning the meaning of literary genre. Poetic works, one could say, following Aristotle, tend to aggregate in 4 moderately distinct segments of the poetic universe: tragedy, comedy, epic, and lyric. Highlight, these are the genres of literature that express the basic gestures, the actions of the soul. Stop. In his book, The Formal Method, written with or without his colleague in the Deva, the Russian critic Bakhtin indicates that far from being an abstract description of devices, highlight this, genre is a fundamental orientation toward reality. Keep going. One might say that human consciousness possesses a series of inner genres for seeing and conceptualizing reality. And he goes on, so do we. A particular aspect of reality can be understood only in connection with the particular means of representing it. Stop. Okay, Tien, the reason you're having an existential crisis is because this is existential stuff. That when you study the genre, you study the soul. That's it. We have 4 parts of our soul. The tragic part, the comic part, the lyric part, and the epic part. We're always striving, we're always losing, we're always coming back and fighting back, and we're always like trying to find a paradise city, which is the lyric part. And so when it feels like we're learning philosophy, because literature is philosophy told in story. Tian just said, I've probably been taught this many times, but you're the first person I've listened to. Actually, you probably haven't, or you're just in the right spot in your life now because you're getting older. I really doubt, unless you've been to the University of Dallas, you're not reading this in high school. You just aren't. In fact, we had a kid, I'm telling you guys, and I'm telling my people online. But we had a kid here who graduated salutatory in I think the class of 2015. And he ended up going to, can you guys still hear me? I think I hit my ear pod. Can you hear me? Tian? Okay, sorry. I thought I turned it off. He went to Dartmouth, right? One of the Ivy League schools. And he was in a literature class his freshman year, and he started talking about genre theory and like some of the stuff that we teach you guys in high school, your sophomore year and your senior year with this ISGET. And the professor's like, what private school did you go to? And he's like, I went to a public high school in Texas. They could not believe that this stuff was being taught at a public high school, and they were just like flabbergasted. The Dartmouth professor. So that was really cool. That was like a little brush my shoulder off a little bit. So back to the task at hand. We're gonna read for just a couple more minutes, and then we're gonna watch the video that Mr. Hadley sent. Oh, someone's coming back into the classroom. Oh. Hey Juan, did you just get here? Because you've missed a bunch. You have to watch my video online when I post it on my YouTube channel. By the way, you guys, my YouTube channel is Vicki Larson. It's very easy to find, picture of me, and you can watch this again if you're super interested or if you weren't here. It is with the inner genre of comedy that this volume is concerned, and with the reality of which it speaks. The particular means of representing it, if we use Aristotle's terms, is the comic, highlight this or circle it, mimesis, which means to mimic. What does it mean to mimic? Anybody?
Like copy.
Mm-hmm. To copy. The artist's representation, so you're mimicking the artist, whereas the particular aspect of reality revealed by the art form is the praxis. So you circle praxis, and the definition is right after the comma. Praxis is the action that is imitated. So in epic, we told you that praxis is practice plus action. So you're practicing the action that you learned by watching somebody else. Highlight. Are you done writing? For the genres are not external structures governed by rules and conventions, but internal forms, perspectives upon life that indicate the kind of response called for by a particular work. So, not to know their genre's nature is like being deaf to the tone of a voice in which a comment is spoken, and blind, top of 8. Blind to the face and gestures that express it. Keep going. To be oblivious of the large generic metaphor governing the climate of a work, and hence the very atmosphere in which characters live and breathe, is to remain unaware of its deepest meaning and hence its power. So, the different contexts result, if you were to believe Aristotle, from the fact that different genres imitate different actions, different movements of spirits. In Francis Ferguson's phrase, to which all the elements of a work conform. I like this. An entire world lies in and beyond the plot and the characters, a tragic, comic, epic, or lyric world, and each act within it corresponds to the actual world only when the viewer or reader is aware of its mimetic distortion. So, it may be more profitable here, however, to be concerned with the genre as representing not so much particular kinds of actions that they can fittingly take place in certain kinds of realms. In work is tragic, for instance, not because of its analyzable elements make it so, but because the action it imitates, that which animates its inner being, takes place in the region of tragedy. Stop. Okay, we're going to stop there. So someone marked that spot where we stopped. What she's saying here in the last paragraph is that if you don't know what realm you're in, so like in the epic essay, Dr. Cowan said that to know what realm you're in is more helpful than it is a hindrance. Like, if you walk into your parents fighting, leave. Don't stay. Right? Like, leave the room. You don't need to be there because they're just going to pick on you. So just leave the room and let them have their thing. But to not know what's going on in that situation is to basically put yourself at a disadvantage. Right? So, like, you kind of just have to read in people. A lot of people don't know how to do this. They don't know how to read the room or the building or the society that they live in. And they make mistakes that can be really hurtful to themselves and other people. So this is sort of teaching us how to read the room, right? If you can recognize a comedy, then you can recognize a comic situation in your own life where you're like, this is funny, but it's bad. So what am I going to do in this situation? You can talk to yourself and see if you got things. So that's why this is philosophy, not just literature.